Introduction to Phonics for Nursery, you'll learn how visual discrimination is an essential pre-phonic skill for 2, 3 and 4-year-olds. By the end of this video, you'll know what visual discrimination looks like in nursery classes and preschools, and how this prepares preschoolers to be ready to recognise the differences between letter shapes later on. And you can find out more about that in the description below. Let's get started with this visual discrimination training, which is all about opening our eyes and switching on our brains. Welcome to this first part of your Ready for Reading training, where we're going to be thinking about opening up children's eyes, switching on their brains and helping them to remember the things that they see, and discovering why visual discrimination and visual memory are so important on this reading journey. This is the very first part of our journey into being ready for reading. This is all about helping children to recognise and remember the similarities and differences between letter shapes in the end. So what we're doing is we're preparing simple ways to be able to do that once they start school. And this isn't a new process. This has been around for hundreds of years. So if you look at the symbols there, they match words, and that was in ancient Egypt. So this idea of matching symbols with actual words is something that's been around for a really long time, and it's our main means of being able to communicate beyond spoken words. So for this skill, visual discrimination is super important. Visual discrimination is about spotting the similarities and differences between letter shapes. And we're going to begin by spotting similarities in everyday situations, in things and objects that children know, or in patterns. So for example, pasta would be a great place to start because lots of children all know what pasta is, but under the category of pasta, this is all pasta, so it's the same, but it's different. There's pasta bows, there's pasta twists, there's tagliatelle, there's spaghetti, there's macaroni, there's ravioli. There's so many different kinds of pasta. So beyond learning that there's a generic or a general word, pasta, children also need to know that pasta can look different. So it's about helping children to understand that there are similarities and differences between shapes all the time in the world around them, helping them to see that, and putting different types of dried pasta in your home corner or role play provision can really help to start the children to think about how one thing, pasta, which is the same, can look very different in different ways. Dogs are another really good example of this. So these are all dogs, so they're similar, they're dogs. They've all got 4 legs, they've all got a tail, they've all got 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose, a tongue, a tail. But these dogs are all really, really different, and in real life they're different too. So when we're working at a preschool stage, if we're trying to tune children's eyes into the fact that in the end, letter shapes can look very similar, but they can also look different. In real life, we need to relate that too. So looking at different types, different categories, different breeds of dogs or cats can be really, really helpful. What we're trying to do is we're thinking about words which label objects, which comes developmentally before labeling letters to sounds, way before. Let's think of some more examples. So let's take the cats book, for example. I've got the cats book there in front of me, 100 cats. So it's a book about cats. So the cats, they're all similar, they're cats. But also in that cat book, there's 100 different kinds of cats. So that's showing children that the same thing can be represented in lots of different ways. And that's what we're aiming for, to get children's eyes tuned in to the fact that things can look similar and they can also look different and be represented in different ways. Here's another example. Imagine that you've taken a can of Coke from the fridge. We know that that photo of the can of Coke there is exactly the same thing as the Coke that you've just taken from the fridge, but it doesn't look exactly the same. We've got to realise that the can in the fridge is the same as the can in the shop, is the same as the can on the photo, is the same as the can on the line drawing, is the same as the can on the cartoon, and those 3 words also say can. Can you see there? There's 6 representations of the same thing. This is where it's hard because, children have got to learn things one way, and then they've also got to learn that the same thing can be represented in different ways too, which is why it's so important for our children to understand that there's more one way of representing things, and so that they can start to sort those things in their head so that when somebody says can to them, they've got a number of different things that they can draw from. Also, think about things that you use all of the time. If you use too many pictures, or if children have had too much experience of screen time, they'll have only ever seen things represented in one way, and pictures can be really not helpful in this regard. So here's a picture of a man who is running, but he could also be jogging, and that just creates this unnecessary confusion. And what if I've only ever seen that word run demonstrated in that one way? That's not going to make me know what it feels like to run, or having seen the difference between somebody running a marathon and somebody running a sprint. So again, we've got to think about the number of different ways children encounter the same words through pictures, through everyday experiences, through cartoons, through photos, to be able to help them to see that the same thing, the word run, can be represented in lots and lots of different ways. Here's another example with the word duck. What we need to really be thinking about is providing children with multiple multisensory encounters so that they can see and experience the same thing in lots of different ways over and over again. We need to show them cartoons of ducks, sure, but also line drawings of ducks, sing songs about ducks, read books about ducks, see ducks on TV, and also go and feed the ducks. That's what I mean by multiple multisensory encounters, seeing the same word, duck, represented in lots and lots of different ways. Because if we've not got our head around that, then introducing the letters duck is not going to be helpful. We're missing a big step on our ready for reading journey. Also, children have got to be able to develop a really good visual memory, holding a visual image in their short-term memory long enough to process it and then remember it again. What I'm really saying here is this is about brain training, helping children to remember stuff so that they can recall it quickly. A good example of this is when we teach children to read their names in nursery or preschool settings. Often we'll do things like self-registration, where when the children come in the morning, they find their name and they hang it on a tree or put it on a board. This is part of their visual discrimination and their visual memory journey. I can see somebody's name on there called Lewis. He is going to, over time, by recognising his name and putting it on the tree every day, he's going to be able to tell the shapes in his name, but he's also going to learn to remember what it looks like. He's going to remember, if he does it enough, that the shape of the letters in his name are different from the shape of the letters in Maximilian or Mohammed's name or Naya's name. This learning of names and recognising of names isn't just about independence, although it really helps because it helps them to be able to find their coat peg or their coat, their lunchbox, but it also helps them to develop this idea that words are made up of shapes, and helps them to start to remember what those shapes look like without even knowing what any of those letter sound correspondences actually mean. And this is what we're aiming for in the end. At the end of the preschool or nursery year, when children are super ready for phonics, this is what it looks like. This little girl here, Molly, has learnt her name and she's learned to read it on sight. So she knows whenever she sees it, that's her name. And she's paid particular attention to the M at the beginning of Molly. She went through a stage at this point where everywhere we went, she was spotting M's and saying, oh, that says Molly, that's in my name, that's in my name. So it could have been mushroom soup, or it could have been M&M's, or it could have been maps. She's already done a very smart thing because she's already realised that that letter M, using different fonts and she started to relate it to the M that she sees every day in her name when she's at preschool. At this stage, Molly didn't know that M made the sound M, far from it, but she could spot it, and that's the kind of idea when we talk about visual discrimination, spotting the difference in letter shapes and visual memory, being able to remember that. That's the end game. Remember, we're building up to this slowly, starting with the things that children already know. So we've already learned a lot of things so far. We've learned that children need to have good visual discrimination and good visual memory to be able to read. They need to be able to tell the difference between letter shapes, but before that, shapes and patterns in everyday life, and they need to be able to remember those. We've learnt that visual discrimination helps children to spot the similarities and differences between objects and shapes. So in our examples, we looked at some ducks, we looked at some dogs, and we looked at pasta, all being the same in their categories, but being represented in different ways. And we looked at some examples of the need to represent the same things in different ways. So we looked at a can of Coke, and we talked about examples of somebody going for a run, and how sorting objects verbally helps children to remember that what they see. So using the words to describe a fat dog, a thin dog, a long dog, a shaggy dog can be really, really helpful to help them with that discrimination process. Preschoolers need lots and lots of multisensory practice, so they need to be hearing these words and seeing these words and experiencing these words in lots and lots of different ways to help them to be able to remember them. So there you have it. An introduction to phonics in nursery to share with everybody working in nursery or preschool in preparation for starting school. And if this introduction to phonics for nursery has been useful, don't forget to give it a quick thumbs up, subscribe and click the bell to be notified for more videos just like this one. We'd love to hear from you. See you soon!